Can love survive when two people grow in different directions? Jason Momoa and Lisa Bonet seemed inseparable, but fame, distance, and shifting priorities slowly pulled them apart. After a year of silence, Jason finally reveals why their marriage ended. Was success the turning point? Did their differences become too much? And could they ever find their way back to each other? Let's explore this in detail. From the outside, Jason Momoa and Lisa Bonet had the kind of love story most people could only dream of. They were more than just a Hollywood couple. There was a deep connection, a bond that seemed unbreakable. Their love had been built over years, through shared adventures, unwavering support, and a kind of admiration that felt rare. But as with many great love stories, the reality was far more complicated than what the world saw. Their journey began long before they ever met. Jason had admired Lisa from afar, long before he became the rugged, charismatic figure that the world came to know. Growing up, he watched her on The Cosby Show, where she played the effortlessly cool and free-spirited Denise Huxtable. She was different from the other stars on television, unique, mysterious, and undeniably beautiful. Even as a child, he told friends that one day he would marry her. It seemed impossible at the time, a fantasy, rather than a real goal. But fate had other plans. In 2005, their worlds finally collided. It happened in a jazz club in Los Angeles, a place filled with warm lighting, deep conversations, and the kind of energy that made everything feel just a little more magical. Jason was still a young actor trying to carve his path in Hollywood, while Lisa had already lived through the highs and lows of fame. From the moment he saw her, he knew. She was the one. His childhood admiration had transformed into something real, something undeniable. But the question was, did she feel the same way? Despite their 12-year age gap, the chemistry between them was immediate. Jason, with his wild spirit, infectious energy, and larger-than-life presence, was unlike anyone Lisa had ever met. She had already been through love and heartbreak, having been married to musician Lenny Kravitz, with whom she shared a daughter. She wasn't looking for something temporary. She needed depth, stability, and a connection that went beyond fleeting attraction. Yet Jason brought something into her life that she hadn't expected. He was fearless, not just in his career, but in the way he loved. He made her laugh, embraced life with childlike enthusiasm, and saw her in a way few people ever had. He wasn't just captivated by her beauty, he admired her wisdom, her sense of calm, and the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and before long, they were inseparable. It wasn't just about romance, it was about partnership. They were two souls who complemented each other perfectly. Jason was the fire, full of adventure and passion, while Lisa was the grounding force, calm and steady. In 2007, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Lola. Jason was overjoyed, embracing fatherhood with the same intensity and devotion he brought to everything in his life. A year later, their son Nakoa Wolf was born, and their bond grew even stronger. For years, their love seemed unshakable. They built a life filled with adventure, shared values, and deep respect. Unlike many Hollywood couples, they kept their private life away from the spotlight, focusing on what mattered most, their family. Jason often spoke about Lisa with admiration, calling her his queen, the woman who had changed his life. She in turn saw in him a protector, someone who brought joy and excitement into her world. For over a decade, they didn't feel the need to rush into marriage. Their love was solid, and they never felt pressure to prove anything to anyone. But in 2017, they finally decided to make it official. It was a private ceremony, intimate and free from the extravagance of most celebrity weddings. To them, it wasn't about the spectacle, it was about solidifying the bond they had built over the years. It was supposed to be there forever. But even the strongest foundations can crack. At first, the changes were subtle. Life was busy, but they had always found their way back to each other. Jason's career was growing steadily, with roles in Game of Thrones and Frontier. But it wasn't until Aquaman in 2018 that everything changed. The film was a massive success, catapulting him into international stardom. Suddenly, he wasn't just an actor, he was a global icon. His schedule became relentless, with constant filming, press tours, and red carpet appearances. Lisa was happy for him. She had always believed in him, always known that he was meant for greatness. But as his world expanded, hers remained the same. She had already lived through the whirlwind of Hollywood during her younger years and had no desire to step back into it. She preferred the quiet life, surrounded by family and close friends. Jason, on the other hand, was in a different phase of his life. He loved the thrill of new opportunities, the excitement of his growing career. He was traveling constantly, moving from one project to the next, while Lisa remained rooted in Los Angeles. They had always balanced each other out, but now for the first time it felt like they were living in two separate worlds. The distance was manageable at first. They made it work, always finding time to reconnect. But over time, the space between them became more than just physical, it became emotional. Lisa started to notice the shift. Jason was always busy, always on the move. Their conversations, once effortless and filled with laughter, became shorter, more strained. She still supported him, still loved him deeply, but something had changed. Jason felt it too. He had worked so hard to achieve his dreams, but in doing so, was he losing the most important thing in his life? He still loved Lisa, still saw her as the woman who had stolen his heart all those years ago. But love, no matter how deep, doesn't always stay the same. For the first time in their relationship, they weren't moving in the same direction. Neither of them wanted to admit it, but the cracks had begun to form. And soon they would be impossible to ignore. Jason Momoa and Lisa Bonet had always found a way to balance their differences. He was the adventurer, always chasing the next horizon, while she found peace in stillness, rooted in the familiarity of home. For years, this contrast had been what made their relationship work. They complemented each other in ways that felt effortless, like two pieces of a puzzle that fit despite their differences. But life has a way of shifting the very foundation that once felt so unshakable. By the time Jason's career exploded with the success of Aquaman in 2018, the distance between them became more than just a matter of geography. Lisa had always known that Jason was meant for something bigger, but neither of them had anticipated the demands that came with it. He was no longer just an actor building his name, he was a global star. The sudden wave of success meant international travel, back-to-back filming schedules, and an industry that demanded more of him than ever before. Lisa, on the other hand, had no interest in re-entering the Hollywood scene. She had already been through it in her younger years and had left that world behind for a reason. Fame had never been something she sought after. What she valued was the life they had built together, their home, their children, the simple moments that made up their world. While Jason was jet-setting across continents for premieres and filming commitments, she remained in Los Angeles, grounding herself in the life she had chosen. At first, they made it work. They had spent years understanding each other's needs and respecting each other's worlds. But slowly, something started to shift. The time apart became longer, the missed calls more frequent. What once had been a natural rhythm of their relationship, Jason leaving for work and coming back to a home that felt unchanged, now felt different. The distance, once temporary, started to feel permanent. Lisa could sense that Jason was evolving, that the industry was shaping him in ways she no longer recognized. It wasn't that he had changed as a person, but his priorities had. And with each passing month, she started to wonder if they were still walking the same path. Jason felt it too. He had spent years dreaming of this moment, of being at the center of the Hollywood machine, of securing roles that would cement his legacy. But success, as thrilling as it was, came at a cost. He had built a life he was proud of, but now he barely had time to live it. Every time he came back home, it felt like he was stepping into a world that had continued without him. Lisa was still the woman he loved, but something was different. The connection that once felt so effortless now required effort. Conversations felt shorter, moments of intimacy less frequent. It didn't help that they had different ways of handling the strain. Lisa, always introspective, withdrew into herself, focusing on the things she could control: her home, her children, her peace. Jason, on the other hand, leaned further into his work. He kept himself busy, drowning out the growing discomfort with new projects and new commitments. It was easier that way, easier than sitting in the silence and acknowledging the growing divide between them. Then came the pandemic in 2020. an unexpected pause that forced the entire world into stillness. For many couples, it was a time of reconnection, a chance to slow down and rediscover the things that mattered most. But for Jason and Lisa, it only highlighted how far apart they had already grown. With Jason unable to escape into his usual fast-paced routine, the cracks in their relationship became impossible to ignore. For the first time in years, they were in the same place for an extended period. At first, it seemed like it might be a chance to reconnect, but instead of bringing them closer, the months in lockdown revealed just how different they had become. Jason struggled with the lack of movement, the forced stillness making him restless. Lisa, on the other hand, embraced it, finding comfort in the solitude, in the quiet. Their different approaches to life, once a source of balance, had now become a source of tension. Parenting was another point of contention. Lisa had always valued structure and stability for their children, wanting to create an environment that felt consistent and safe. Jason, with his free-spirited nature, had a more relaxed approach, encouraging spontaneity and adventure. What once made them a great team now became a source of disagreement. The way they saw the world, the way they approached life, was no longer in sync. As the months went on, the reality became undeniable. They were no longer the same people they had been when they first fell in love. Lisa had evolved in one direction, Jason in another. And while there was still love between them, love wasn't enough to bridge the widening gap. By the time the world started reopening, so did their eyes to the inevitable truth. Lisa had spent years supporting Jason in his dreams, standing by him as he built the career he had always wanted. But now she had to ask herself, was this still the life she wanted? Jason, for all his success, had to confront his own question. Was he losing the woman who had been his home? Neither of them wanted to admit it, but deep down they both knew. The relationship they had built over nearly 2 decades was no longer the same. And for the first time, they had to face the possibility that maybe, just maybe, it was time to let go. Jason Momoa and Lisa Bonet had spent years building something rare, an unshakable partnership that seemed immune to the pressures of Hollywood. They had weathered challenges before, finding ways to reconnect even when life tried to pull them in different directions. But some distances grow too vast to bridge. The strain had been building for years, creeping into their conversations, their routines, and the very foundation of their marriage. Neither of them wanted to be the first to say it, but the truth had already settled between them. They were no longer moving forward together. As Jason resumed his career at full speed after the pandemic, the divide between them only deepened. With new projects lined up, he was back on the road, traveling from one location to the next. Lisa remained where she had always been in Los Angeles, focused on their children and the life they had created. Their dynamic had shifted in a way that neither of them could ignore. Jason's world had expanded beyond what they had imagined when they first met. Lisa, on the other hand, had only become more rooted in what she valued most: home, family, and a life free from the chaos of Hollywood. For years, they had both made sacrifices for their relationship. But now those sacrifices felt heavier. Lisa had always supported Jason's ambitions, encouraging him to chase the dreams he had worked so hard for. But in doing so, she had watched their relationship slowly become something unrecognizable. The man she fell in love with, the one who once felt so present and full of life, was now always somewhere else. Jason, in turn, felt the weight of a marriage that no longer fit the person he was becoming. He still loved Lisa, but he also knew that love alone wasn't enough to keep them together. Tension had been growing beneath the surface for a long time, but it wasn't until a heated conversation in late 2021 that everything became painfully clear. Jason had been home for a brief period between projects, trying to settle back into a rhythm that no longer felt natural. The conversations were different now, less effortless, more measured. They both knew what was coming, even if neither of them wanted to say it. At some point, in the midst of an argument that neither of them had the energy to finish, Jason let out words he would later regret. The moment passed quickly, but the impact lingered. It wasn't about anger or resentment. It was about realization. They had become strangers in their own marriage. The admiration, the effortless partnership, the way they once looked at each other, it had all shifted. What had once been a source of strength now felt like a reminder of everything they had lost. Lisa didn't respond with anger. She simply withdrew, retreating into the quiet understanding that had been growing between them for months. Jason felt it too. They had reached the point where holding on felt more painful than letting go. By early 2022, the decision had been made. They would separate not out of bitterness, but out of the understanding that they could no longer give each other what they once had. Their marriage had run its course, not because of betrayal or some singular event, but because they had grown in different directions. The love that had once been so effortless now felt like something they were forcing themselves to hold on to. On a quiet evening in January, they sat down together and made the decision public. They wrote a joint statement, one that didn't place blame or invite speculation. It wasn't a scandalous breakup filled with drama. It was simply a recognition that their time as husband and wife had come to an end. They shared the news with their children first, making sure they understood that this wasn't the end of their family, only a new chapter. Their priority had always been their children, and that would never change. No matter what happened between them, they were still a family, still committed to raising their children together. When they finally posted the statement on social media, the world reacted with shock. To those who had admired their relationship from afar, it seemed impossible that they had come to this point. Jason and Lisa had been the couple who defied the odds, who seemed untouchable by the usual pitfalls of Hollywood romances. But the truth was far less dramatic than the headlines made it seem. Their love hadn't crumbled in a single moment. It had simply faded over time, slowly, quietly, until it was undeniable. Jason didn't say much publicly after the announcement. He kept himself busy with work, avoiding the questions that followed him wherever he went. Lisa, too, remained quiet, choosing to process the separation privately. They had done what they believed was best, but that didn't mean it was easy. Ending a marriage, especially one that had lasted nearly 2 decades, was never simple. Even when it was the right decision, there was still grief, still the ache of knowing that something once so beautiful had come to an end. For the world, their statement was just another headline, another celebrity breakup to dissect. But for Jason and Lisa, it was the end of something deeply personal, a life they had built together, a love that had once felt unshakable. But even in endings, there is always the question of what comes next. Jason Momoa had always been someone who lived in the moment, embracing life with an infectious energy that drew people to him. But in the months following the announcement of his separation from Lisa Bonet, he found himself in unfamiliar territory. The whirlwind of work was still there, filming commitments, press events, and industry demands. But the life he had built outside of Hollywood was no longer the same. No matter how many projects he threw himself into, there was an emptiness that lingered. He had spent years sharing his world with Lisa, with their children, with the quiet understanding that no matter how far he traveled, there was always a home waiting for him. Now, that sense of certainty is gone. For the first time in years, Jason found himself reflecting on what it all meant. Success has always been the goal. He had fought to get where he was, to carve out a career that he could be proud of. But what had it cost him? He wasn't the same struggling actor who had walked into that jazz club in Los Angeles all those years ago, mesmerized by a woman who seemed to embody everything he had ever wanted. He had achieved what he once thought was impossible. He had built a life with her, started a family, created something real. And yet, somewhere along the way, it had slipped through his fingers. Lisa, too, was adjusting to life after Jason. She had always been private, choosing to keep much of her personal life away from the public eye. Now, more than ever, she retreated into the quiet spaces she had always found comfort in. She had spent years standing beside Jason, supporting him as he chased his dreams. But now it was time for her to focus on herself. She had always been someone who valued stillness, who understood that sometimes the greatest growth happens in solitude. Their paths had officially diverged, but they would always be connected through their children. That was something neither of them questioned. Co-parenting was their priority, and despite the separation, they remained committed to ensuring that their children felt nothing but love and stability. Jason had always been a devoted father, and that didn't change. He made time for Lola and Nakoa Wolf, making sure they knew that just because their parents were no longer together, it didn't mean their family was broken. There were moments when the weight of it all felt heavier than he had expected. The questions from the media, the speculation, the rumors about why they had really split. Some insisted it was career pressure. Others speculated about deeper conflicts that had never been made public. Jason chose to stay silent. The truth was theirs to carry, not something to be dissected and analyzed by people who had never lived it. Lisa remained just as private, choosing to let the world say what it wanted without ever feeling the need to correct the narrative. In an industry where high-profile breakups often turn into public spectacles, Jason and Lisa had managed to avoid the drama. There were no bitter accusations, no explosive interviews or public disputes, just a quiet, mutual understanding that their marriage had run its course. But that didn't mean there wasn't pain. Love doesn't simply disappear overnight, and neither of them could erase the years they had spent together. Jason often found himself looking back, not with regret, but with the understanding that some love stories don't end the way people expect them to. He had once believed that Lisa was his forever, the woman he would grow old with, the one who would be by his side no matter what. But life had led them down different roads, and now he had to find peace with that. For Lisa, the transition was just as profound. She had always known who she was, had never lost herself in the chaos of Hollywood, and that remained true even now. She wasn't someone who dwelled in the past, nor did she let heartbreak define her. She embraced change the way she always had, with quiet strength and the knowledge that every ending is also a beginning. Their lives moved forward, separate but forever intertwined. Jason poured himself into his work, taking on new roles, embracing the career that had once felt so far out of reach. He traveled, met new people, and continued to build the life he had always wanted. But no matter how much time passed, there were still moments when he would catch himself thinking about the past. Not in a way that held him back, but in a way that reminded him of everything he had learned, of the love that had shaped him, of the family that would always be a part of him. Lisa, too, found herself stepping into this new chapter with clarity. She had spent years loving Jason, growing alongside him, but she also knew that life had more to offer beyond what they had shared. She focused on her children, on her own path, on the things that had always brought her peace. Their love story hadn't ended in anger or betrayal. It had simply evolved into something different. And while the world continued to speculate, to wonder if they would ever find their way back to each other, Jason and Lisa knew the truth. Some love lasts a lifetime, even if it no longer looks the way it once did. Time moved forward, and with it, Jason Momoa and Lisa Bonet settled into their new reality. The life they had built together had shifted into something different, something unfamiliar, yet still filled with respect. They had once been inseparable, but now they were two individuals walking their own paths, bound only by the love they shared for their children. The world had adjusted to the news of their separation, but the questions remained. Would they ever find their way back to each other, or was this truly the end of their love story? Jason continued to immerse himself in his work, taking on roles that pushed his career even further. He embraced the life of an actor at the height of his success, moving from one set to another, traveling across the world for film shoots and premieres. His presence in Hollywood had never been stronger, yet there were moments when he found himself alone in the quiet, reflecting on everything that had changed. He was no longer the man who had walked into that jazz club in Los Angeles years ago, filled with awe at the woman who would later become his wife. He had grown, evolved, and achieved the things he had always dreamed of. But success had come with sacrifices, and even with everything he had gained, there were things he had lost along the way. Lisa had always been someone who thrived in solitude, and the months following their divorce were no different. She had built a life outside of Hollywood, one that remained untouched by the chaos of the industry. While the world speculated about how she was handling the separation, she remained grounded, focused on her children and the life she had always valued. She had no interest in proving anything to anyone. She had loved Jason deeply, had shared nearly 2 decades of her life with him, but she knew that their time together had reached its natural conclusion. There was no bitterness, no anger, just an understanding that their love had taken them as far as it could. Despite the separation, they remained connected through their children, making sure that Lola and Nakoa Wolf never felt the weight of their parents' decision. Jason was still an active presence in their lives, ensuring that his time with them was never compromised by his demanding career. Lisa, too, made it a priority to maintain stability, knowing that while their family dynamic had changed, their commitment to their children never would. There were still family moments, still shared milestones, but they were no longer experienced as husband and wife. The media, however, was not as ready to move on. Every time Jason was spotted at an event alone, the rumors would start again. Was he dating someone new? Has Lisa found love again? Was there a chance that they would reunite? The speculation was endless, but neither Jason nor Lisa paid it any attention. They had always kept their relationship private, and they would do the same now. Their love story had never been about proving anything to the world. It was about two people who had found each other, built a life together, and when the time came, had chosen to part ways with dignity. For Jason, the adjustment was still ongoing. He was used to movement, to distractions, to the ever-changing nature of his career. But there were moments when stillness crept in, when he allowed himself to sit with the emotions he had tried so hard to outrun. There was no regret, only reflection. He had loved Lisa with everything he had, and that love had shaped him in ways he would always carry. Lisa, in her quiet way, processed things differently. She had always been deeply introspective, and this chapter of her life was no exception. She found peace in knowing that she had given everything she could to the relationship, that she had loved Jason fully, and that even though they were no longer together, their story would always be a part of who she was. Their relationship had changed, but it had never truly ended. They were no longer partners in the way they once were, but they would always share a connection that went beyond romance. Time had taken them in different directions, but it had also given them the space to grow in ways they never would have if they had stayed together. The world continued to wonder, to question whether there was a possibility of reconciliation. Could time apart bring them back together? Would they ever rekindle what they had once shared? Jason and Lisa never answered those questions because, in the end, only they knew the truth. Some love stories don't have definitive endings. Some love, no matter how much it changes, never truly disappears. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.